Ifunanya Cole cleaned the corridors of the Dragunov Grand every night after midnight. 26 years old, invisible to the guests sleeping behind their lacquered doors, just another woman in a blue uniform pushing a cart through hallways that cost more per square meter than her entire street in Peckham. Nobody noticed her. That was the job. That was, in many ways, the whole point. She had been doing this for 3 years. 3 years of moving through other people's luxury without touching it. 3 years of learning which doors had lights under them at 2 a.m., which guests left their televisions on all night, which floors carried the particular silence of men who did not sleep, because sleeping meant lowering your guard. She noticed things. Always had. It was the kind of noticing that you develop when the world makes clear, early and repeatedly, that no one is going to look out for you. So you learn to look. And at 3:04 a.m. on a Thursday, on the top floor corridor of the most expensive hotel in London, Ifunanya Cole looked down and saw an envelope on the floor outside the penthouse door. Not slid underneath it, pushed out from inside. Her cart stopped. Her hand did not move. Because in 3 years of cleaning these floors, she had never once seen that door from the inside do anything at all. She looked at the envelope. The envelope had no name on it. She picked it up. She should have slid it back and walked away. She opened it instead. A Nigerian cleaner working a 3 a.m. shift just found an envelope outside the most dangerous man in London's penthouse door. And what's inside it could get her killed before sunrise. Drop a heart if you already feel what's coming. Ifunanya Cole has spent 3 years being invisible in that building. She notices everything and says nothing, because nothing is what the world has always expected from her. But tonight, what she's holding in her hands changes all of that. Hit that like button and subscribe to Russian Mafia Tales. Because Alexei Dragunov has no idea that the one person standing between him and the men who want him dead is a woman he has never once looked at. The clock is running. It is 3:04 a.m., and she has until dawn. 3:04 a.m. 4 floors above the sleeping city of London, 37 minutes earlier, Alexei Dragunov had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, looking down at the Thames, the way men like him always looked at things, as though the city existed to confirm what he already knew about himself. 41 years old, self-made in the way that required you never to look too closely at the making. He had built an empire through precision, patience, and the particular ruthlessness of a man who had decided, young, that sentiment was a tax he could not afford to pay. His phone had buzzed at 2:27 a.m. Mikhail, his operations chief. Tomorrow's meeting with the Geneva partners is confirmed. Dragunov had not looked up from the window. Is there anything else? No, sir. Then don't call me again tonight. The line went dead. Good. He had no patience for men who mistook access for intimacy. He trusted Mikhail the way he trusted all of them, precisely as far as he had verified, and not a single inch beyond. In his world, the men who stayed loyal were the men who understood that the cost of disloyalty was not dismissal. He trusted no one completely. He never had. He had no idea that trust was not his problem tonight. His problem was already in the corridor. 4 floors below, Ifunanya had been working since midnight. Wing C, floors 7 through 10. 42 rooms, 3 service cupboards, 2 ice machines, and 1 particularly difficult stretch of carpet outside room 819, where someone had spilled something dark and acidic 3 weeks ago that no amount of product had fully lifted. She had noted it in the maintenance log. Maintenance had not responded. She had noted it again. She did not expect a response. This was how it worked. She moved through the building the way she always moved through it, methodically, quietly, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to complete the work and leave no evidence of herself behind. She was not unhappy. She was not happy either. She was present and precise, and she had a 6:15 a.m. bus to catch. She sent £300 home to Enugu every month. Her mother was saving for a roof repair. Her younger brother was in his second year of secondary school and needed new textbooks. Ifunanya had a spreadsheet. She always had a spreadsheet. Numbers were honest in a way that people rarely were. She turned the corner onto the penthouse corridor at 3:02 a.m. The corridor was empty, warm, amber lit in the way that expensive hotels lit their upper floors. Intimate, like a private club that had never once considered you might want to join. Oil paintings in gilt frames ran the length of the wall. A console table near the lift held a vase of flowers that someone changed every morning. White lilies, always. Ifunanya had never understood white lilies in a hotel. They smelled like funerals. She was halfway down the corridor when she saw it. The envelope, on the floor, outside the penthouse door. She stopped her cart. She had cleaned this floor every Thursday night for 7 months. She knew this door. She knew the silence behind it. She knew the 2 men who stood outside it in 12-hour rotations. And she knew that on those nights, neither of them ever spoke to her, or made eye contact, or acknowledged her existence in any way that could be described as human. They were not here tonight. That was the first wrong thing. The envelope was the second. It was plain white, no name, no address, standard hotel stationery, the kind that sat in the leather folder on every desk in every room in this building. It had been slid from inside, not underneath, meaning whoever had pushed it out had opened the door, placed it on the floor, and closed the door again without wanting to be seen. Someone inside the most secure room in this building had tried to get rid of something quietly, and they had left it in a corridor that Ifunanya Cole cleaned at 3 a.m. every Thursday. She looked at it for 4 seconds, long enough to know exactly what the sensible thing to do was. She picked it up. She read her mother's voice in the back of her mind. "Ifu, you and trouble, since you were small." She almost smiled. She opened the envelope. The paper inside was a single sheet, folded twice. She unfolded it under the amber light of the corridor and began to read. And as she read, the warmth of the hallway seemed to drop several degrees. Names, dates, wire transfers, a timeline. 3 signatures at the bottom of the page, one of which she recognized from the news, from the papers, from the kind of world that existed 3 floors above the one she cleaned. It was not a message, it was a confession. And the man it was written to destroy was sleeping 30 feet from where she was standing. Ifunanya folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, stood in the amber corridor at 3:07 a.m., with the quietest, most dangerous document in London in her hands, and the sound of her own heartbeat very loud in her ears. She reached into her uniform pocket, took out her pen. She should walk away. She knew she should walk away. Every practical, reasonable, self-preserving instinct she had developed across 26 years of navigating a world that had never once made things easy for her was telling her clearly and loudly to put the envelope down, finish her shift, catch the 6:15, and never think about this again. She uncapped the pen. She wrote 4 lines on the back of a folded service receipt. Small, clear handwriting. The handwriting of a woman who had learned early that precision mattered. I found this in the corridor. I read it. I work here. Room 412, service log. If you want to know who else has been watching your door tonight, you know where to find me. She slid the note inside the envelope. She placed it back on the floor outside the penthouse door, exactly where she had found it. Then she straightened up, took one steady breath, and pushed her cart forward. She found it. She read it. And instead of running, she picked up her pen. Ifunanya Cole has just made herself the most dangerous person in that building. Not because she has a weapon, not because she has power, but because she has information and the courage to use it. Drop a heart if that note just stopped your breathing. Subscribe to Russian Mafia Tales, because Alexei Dragunov is about to open his door and find an envelope he didn't expect, with a note from a woman he has never noticed. And everything, for both of them, is about to change. It is 3:09 a.m. The corridor is empty, and somewhere in this building, the men who need that document to disappear have just realized it hasn't arrived. The hunt has already begun. Alexei Dragunov had arrived at the Dragunov Grand at 11:47 p.m., which was late even by his standards. He did not announce his arrivals. He never had. The men around him had learned long ago that the correct response to Dragunov entering a room was not acknowledgement, but adjustment. A subtle, immediate realignment of posture, attention, and conversation that happened the way a compass needle swings north. Automatic, involuntary, telling. He was tall in the way that men are tall when they have never learned to make themselves smaller for other people's comfort. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since become something harder and more interesting. Angular, controlled, permanently assessing. He moved through the hotel lobby without looking at it, because he owned it, and owning something meant it had ceased to require his attention. Mikhail met him at the lift, his operations chief. 15 years in the role, trusted in the limited way Dragunov trusted anyone, meaning his loyalty had been tested, verified, and catalogued. Mikhail was efficient, discreet, and had learned never to offer opinions unless asked for them. Geneva confirmed, Mikhail said, matching his pace. The Volkov transfer cleared this afternoon, and the quarterly audit. Send it to my office. Dragunov stepped into the lift. Anything else? It was not a question. It was a threshold. Everything on this side of it was permitted. Everything beyond it was not. No, sir. The lift doors closed. Mikhail stood in the lobby and watched the floor numbers rise. His jaw was set. His hands were clasped behind his back. And for just a moment, a fraction of a second that no one who didn't already know what to look for would ever catch, his eyes moved sideways to the man standing near the concierge desk. The man near the concierge desk gave the smallest possible nod. Then he took out his phone and typed a single line. He's in. The penthouse corridor was empty when Ifunanya turned onto it at 3:02 a.m. It was always empty at this hour. That was one of the things she had catalogued in 7 months of Thursday nights. The rhythms of this floor, the patterns of the men who stood outside that door, the particular quality of silence that settled up here after midnight, like a different atmosphere entirely. The guards were gone tonight. She noted it the way she noted everything, without expression, without pause, filing it in the part of her mind that kept track of things that didn't fit. In 3 years of hotel cleaning, she had developed an extensive mental file of things that didn't fit. Most of them turned out to be nothing. A few had not. She had learned to tell the difference by never assuming. She pushed her cart forward. That was when she saw the envelope. It was on the floor, white, unmarked, lying flush against the base of the penthouse door, with a particular stillness of something recently placed, not slid under the door from outside, but pushed out from within. She could tell by the angle, by the way it had settled. Someone inside that room had opened the door and put it there, quietly, without wanting to be seen doing it. Ifunanya stopped her cart. She stood over the envelope for 3 full seconds, which was long enough to understand that picking it up was not part of her job, and not in any way her business, and not something a sensible woman, alone on a top-floor corridor at 3 a.m., had any practical reason to do. She picked it up. Plain hotel stationery, sealed. The paper had a slight weight to it. 1 sheet, folded twice. She turned it over. No name, no room number, no instruction of any kind. She should slide it back under the door. She should note it in the service log and move on. She should finish her shift and catch the 6:15 and send her mother's money on Friday and not think about this again. She broke the seal. The paper unfolded in her hands in the amber light of the corridor, and she read it slowly, the way she read everything, completely, without skimming, without the luxury of missing something. Names. She recognized one from the business pages. Dates going back 11 months. Wire transfers in amounts that made the number she sent to Enugu every month feel very small and very far away. A timeline. A method. 3 signatures. She read it twice. Then she stood in the corridor of the most expensive hotel in London at 3:07 a.m., holding a signed confession for the planned assassination of the man sleeping behind the door in front of her, and she was very still and very quiet, and her heart was beating in a way that she was conscious of for the first time in years. She thought about the 6:15 bus. She thought about her mother's roof. She thought about her brother's textbooks and her spreadsheet and the £300 and the sensible, careful, invisible life she had constructed with considerable effort and discipline. Then she reached into her uniform pocket and took out her pen. She wrote 4 lines on the back of a folded service receipt. She did not hesitate over the wording. The words came the way the truest decisions come. Fully formed, already certain. I found this in the corridor. I read it. I work here, room 412 service log. If you want to know who else has been watching your door tonight, you know where to find me. She folded her note inside the envelope. She placed it back on the floor outside the penthouse door. She straightened up. She took 1 breath. She heard it land softly on the other side. The clock had started. 3:19 a.m. Wing C, floor 9. Ifunanya changed the bin liner in room 912 and moved to 914. She was operating on the surface of herself, hands doing the work, eyes tracking the room, the professional layer of her functioning, precisely as it always functioned. Underneath that layer, something else was running. Quieter, faster. The part of her that had read the envelope and understood what it meant was now doing its own calculations, separate from the part that was changing bin liners and noting the low battery indicator on the hallway emergency light in the service log. The building felt the same. That was what she kept returning to. It felt exactly the same. But she had learned not to trust that. At 3:24 a.m., she came out of 914 and looked down the corridor. A man was standing near the service lift. He had not been there 7 minutes ago. He was dressed in hotel staff uniform, the dark waistcoat, the name badge, but he was standing with the particular stillness of someone who was not waiting for a lift. He was watching the corridor. Ifunanya walked to her cart. She did not look at him again. She moved to 916, knocked twice as protocol required, unlocked it, went inside. She stood in the dark of the empty room for a moment, with her hand on the door. She ran through what she knew. The envelope had been meant for collection. Someone had been supposed to retrieve it from that corridor tonight. Someone with access, someone on shift, someone invisible enough to be on this floor at 3 a.m. without causing questions. The window for collection had passed. Whoever was waiting for that document now knew it hadn't arrived, which meant they were looking for it, which meant they were looking for whoever had it last. Ifunanya had been on that corridor at the precise window of collection. Her service log would show it. Her swipe card would show it. She was not invisible anymore. By 3:31 a.m., she knew with certainty that she was being followed. Not chased, not confronted, followed. The way professionals follow, which is to say she felt it before she could prove it. A second man near the ice machine on floor 8. The way the corridor behind her was never quite empty when she turned around. The sound of the service door on floor 7 opening 4 minutes after she had come through it. She kept moving. She kept her pace exactly the same. Her mind was working at a different speed entirely. She could not go to building security. The document she had read told her which names inside this organization could not be trusted, and she did not know which of those names the security desk reported to. She could not leave the building. Her swipe card would register at every exit, and they would know immediately. She could not call the police from inside this building without someone hearing, and she knew enough about men like Dragunov to know that the kind of trouble surrounding him did not resolve itself through a 999 call. She had one option. She needed to get to Dragunov before his own people got to her. She needed to be inside that penthouse, standing in front of the man himself, before whoever was moving through this building caught up with her position. She turned left at the end of floor 7's service corridor, instead of right. Right went to the main staff lift. Left went to the maintenance stairwell, unmonitored, unswipeable. The route the engineering team used for early morning checks. She knew about it because 6 months ago, she had found a maintenance door propped open during her shift and had noted it in the log and wondered, briefly, why someone would need a route through this building that didn't register anywhere. She understood now. She took the stairs. 4 floors. She climbed them at a pace that was fast, without being a run, because running meant panic, and panic meant noise, and noise meant being found. Her breathing was controlled, her hands were steady, her chest was doing something she ignored, with the focused discipline of a woman who had learned a long time ago that fear was permitted to exist, but was not permitted to make decisions. She reached the penthouse corridor at 3:38 a.m. She walked to the door. She knocked 3 times. Measured. Calm. The way you knock when you need someone to open a door, and you only have one chance to make them believe you're worth opening it for. Purr. Then it opened. Alexei Dragunov stood in the doorway in a dark shirt, no jacket, holding her note. Not the envelope, the note specifically, unfolded, her 4 handwritten lines visible between his fingers. He had been awake. She could see that immediately. Not roused from sleep, but awake in the way of men who do not sleep deeply, because sleeping deeply is a vulnerability they have never been able to afford. He was taller than she had expected. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, with total, unhurried attention, the kind that catalogued rather than dismissed. She was a black woman in a navy cleaning uniform with her hair in a low bun and a light sheen of exertion across her forehead from 4 flights of unmonitored stairs. She held his gaze without looking away, because looking away was not something she could afford either. Neither of them spoke for a moment that was considerably longer than comfortable. Then he said, "You wrote this." It was not a question. "Yes." He looked at her note again, then at her. She watched him calculate. She could almost see the machinery of it, the same machinery she had observed from a distance for months, now running at close range and directed entirely at her. "You read the document, every word." And instead of running, he said, "You wrote a note." Something shifted in his expression. It was not warmth. It was the particular quality of attention that a man gives to something that has genuinely surprised him, which in Alexei Dragunov's life, she understood, was an exceptionally rare occurrence. He stepped aside. She walked in. The penthouse was exactly what she had imagined, and nothing like it. Large, yes. Expensive, yes. But lived in the specific, sparse way of a man who had not decorated so much as occupied. A desk with 3 laptops open, a half-empty glass of water. The city through floor-to-ceiling windows. London enormous and indifferent, and lit like a circuit board below them. She told him everything, standing first, then sitting, when he indicated the chair across from his desk with a movement so brief it was almost not a gesture at all. She told him about the corridor, the angle of the envelope, what the document said, which names appeared on it, the timeline, the method, the 3 signatures. She told him about the man near the service lift on floor 9, and the door on floor 7, and the maintenance stairwell. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, the way she wrote her service logs, precisely, completely, in order. He listened without interrupting. This was, she would reflect later, the most attentively anyone had ever listened to her in her adult life. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Then Dragunov picked up his phone. He made 3 calls. Each one lasted less than 90 seconds. Each one was conducted in Russian, in a tone so controlled it contained no detectable emotion whatsoever, which she understood instinctively was more frightening than anger would have been. Between the second and third call, he looked across the desk at her. Really looked. The way the image in the thumbnail would capture it if anyone had been there to take it. And she had the distinct and disorienting sense of being seen completely for the first time by someone who had previously not known she existed. By 4:15 a.m., the building was secured. She did not ask what that meant. She did not need to. She sat in the most expensive room she had ever been in and let her hands rest in her lap and breathed, for the first time since 3:04 a.m., without managing the breath. Outside the windows, London continued its 4 a.m. business. Sirens somewhere distant, the river holding the light, the city enormous and utterly indifferent to what had just happened on its top floor. Dragunov set his phone down. He looked at her across the desk. "Mikhail," he said quietly. It was not an explanation. It was the sound of a man rearranging 30 years of assumption about who he could trust. Ifunanya said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. "You could have left the building," he said. "You could have walked away." "I know. Why didn't you?" She considered the question the way she considered everything, without hurry, without performance. "Because it was right," she said, "and someone had to." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, with the weight of a man who had just heard something he had stopped believing existed. 3 weeks passed. Ifunanya worked her shifts. Thursday nights, Wing C, floors 7 through 10. The penthouse corridor looked the same. The door looked the same. The new guards outside it were different men, quieter, more watchful, with the particular competence of people who had been selected rather than inherited. She did not acknowledge them, and they did not acknowledge her. But things had changed, quietly, in the way that things change when someone with considerable reach decides, without announcement, to rearrange the world around a person they have decided to protect. Her supervisor stopped scheduling her for the worst shifts without explanation. The walk from the bus stop to her flat in Peckham began to feel different at night. A safety she couldn't locate the source of, but felt with the certainty of someone who had spent years knowing what the absence of it felt like. A problem with her immigration documentation that had been stalled for 8 months was resolved in a single week by a solicitor she had not hired, who sent her paperwork in the post with no covering letter. She noted all of it. She said nothing. She sent her mother's £300 on Friday, as always, and updated her spreadsheet, and caught the 6:15 and lived her life. Then, one morning in November, an envelope arrived at her flat. Not plain white, cream, heavy stock, the kind of envelope that costs more than her weekly food shop. Her full name on the front in a precise, formal hand, the handwriting of a man who had learned it as a discipline rather than an expression. No return address. She recognized it anyway. Inside was not a check. It was not a threat. It was a card, 3 sentences requesting her presence at an address in Mayfair on the following Thursday at 11 a.m., if she was willing. Ifunanya read it twice. She set it on her kitchen table. She made herself a cup of tea and sat with it for 20 minutes and thought about all the reasons it was complicated and all the reasons it was simple, and arrived, as she always arrived, at the truth underneath both. She wrote yes on the back of the card. She put it in her bag. She posted it on her way to the bus stop. The address in Mayfair was not a hotel. It was an office, clean, minimal, overlooking a garden square where the last of the autumn leaves were gathered in damp corners. A receptionist showed her to a room on the 2nd floor. The room had 2 chairs and a table and a view of the square and nothing else that was decorative or unnecessary. Dragunov was already there. Dark suit this time, no open collar, fully composed, fully himself. But something in the room was different from the penthouse. Lower, quieter, more deliberate. This was not a man receiving her on his territory. This was a man who had chosen a neutral space because he understood, perhaps for the first time, that what he had to say required the other person to be comfortable enough to hear it. He stood when she entered. She noted that. He did not strike her as a man who stood for people. They sat. He placed a folder on the table between them. He did not push it toward her yet. "I've spent 30 years," he said, "in buildings full of people I treated as furniture." He said it the way he said most things, without self-pity, without performance, as a statement of fact that he had recently been forced to reassess. Cleaners, drivers, staff, people who moved through my world every day and whom I considered not with contempt, with nothing, which is worse. Ifunanya waited. "One woman," he said, with a pen and 4 lines of handwriting, "changed what I thought I knew about that." He looked at her directly. "I am trying to understand what to do with that. I am not finding it straightforward." "No," she said, "I imagine not." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost nothing. Almost a great deal. He pushed the folder across the table. She opened it. Inside was a letter of funding, full tuition for a nursing degree at King's College London, a bursary covering 4 years of living costs, a named scholarship that would continue in perpetuity for students from sub-Saharan Africa. The scholarship had a name, her name. She closed the folder. She sat with it for a moment. "This is too much," she said. "It is not enough," he said. "But it is what I can do. And I have learned recently that doing what you can is not nothing." She looked at him across the table, this contained, complicated, slowly changing man, and understood that this was not a transaction. It was the beginning, imperfect and uncertain, of something she did not have a word for yet. A man attempting, in the only language he had ever been fluent in, to become someone different. "Thank you," she said. "No." His voice was quiet. "Thank you for not walking away." She left the building at 12:47 p.m. and walked out into London daylight, the city enormous around her, the sky a flat November white, the street full of people moving through their ordinary Thursday with no knowledge of any of it. She walked to the bus stop. She sat down. She thought about King's College. She thought about her mother's roof. She thought about her brother's textbooks and how the spreadsheet was going to need a new column. She had spent 3 years cleaning floors in buildings that did not know her name. She had always been extraordinary. She had known it distantly, the way you know things that the world has spent a long time trying to make you forget. Now, finally, someone else knew it too. She caught the 6:15.